welcome back to my channel, Roses. I'm Avarice Rose, and today we are once again going to be diving into another 2 haunted castles situated in England. If you are new or if you have been here a while, I would love it if you click the subscribe button, ding that notification bell, and leave a like on this video if this is the kind of content that you like. So we are nearing the end of quarantine April, and I know a lot of us our states have been extended to that of like May 15th or even like to the end of May. So do know that for as long as we are quarantined and even after I will be producing these videos, I have decided upon every Friday releasing this series so that there's something going into the weekend. If I am able to increase my content production during the week, I might do Wednesday, Friday. However, that's a lot of research and I do have other things I have to do. However, I am really enjoying this and I hope that you guys are too. It's a little bit of a different angle than I was originally going to at the beginning of the year with this channel. I was really going to focus in on anime, voice acting, gaming, that sort of thing, and D&D, like nerdy stuff. And all of that is on hold right now. So this is the second most nerdy thing I could think of to do, combining history and spooky things, which are 2 things that I absolutely enjoy. So I really hope you guys are enjoying this and I appreciate you all for watching. So without further ado, sit back, get a snack and a hot beverage, and let's dive into episode 4 of Haunted Castles of England, Pontefract Castle and Windsor Castle. So Pontefract Castle sits in Pontefract, Wakefield, West Yorkshire, England. It's a lot, I know, but it is in West Yorkshire. The castle is on a rock to the east of the town above All Saints Church and was constructed in approximately 1070 by Ilbert de Lacy on land that was granted to him by William the Conqueror as a reward for his support during the Norman Conquest. Now, one thing that I do want to point out that in all of these castle videos thus far, a de Lacy has been attached to a majority of these castles going back to the, the turn of the 1st century, 1070, 100, 900, that sort of thing. So keep that in the back of your mind. I might do a deep dive into the de Lacy family to see where they originated, where they came from, how they became so popular and in such good graces of so many rulers over so many years until their demise. And I don't even know if there's still any currently around today, but I really would love to do that because I'm seeing this connection and it is fascinating to me. So on this site, there is evidence that there was people here previously, occupation on this site, and that it would be one Anglo-Saxon burial ground. So this castle is built allegedly on top of an Anglo-Saxon burial ground. And of course, Anglo-Saxons are the people who were here prior to Norman invaders, French invaders, that kind of thing. Initially, the castle was a wooden structure and it was replaced with stone over time. So a lot of these castles start out as baileys. So they start out as like mounds of earth and lots of wood and that sort of thing. And then over time, as construction begins to advance or techniques begin to advance, they use and implement stone and masonry. Robert de Lacy failed to support Henry I during his power struggle with his brother, and the king confiscated the castle from his family during the 12th century. Fun. Roger de Lacy paid King Richard I 3,000 marks for the honor of Pontefract, but the king retained possession of the castle, so essentially he was able to live in the castle, be castle caretaker, run the castle, but he didn't really own it still. Richard II's successor, King John, gave Lacy the castle in 1199, which is the year he actually ascended the throne. King John was said to be one of the worst kings of England, just FYI. When Roger died in 1213 and was succeeded by his eldest son John, the king took possession of Castle Donington and Pontefract Castle. The Lacys lived in the castle until the early 14th century. In 1311, the castle passed by marriage to the estates of the House of Lancaster. Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, was beheaded outside of the castle 6 days after his defeat at the Battle of Boroughbridge. And that was a sentence placed on him by the then King Edward II. This resulted in the Earl becoming a martyr, and his tomb at Pontefract Priory became a kind of a shrine. It went next to Henry, Duke of Lancaster, and subsequently to John of Gaunt, the third son of King Edward III. King Edward III made the castle his personal residence and spent a vast sum of money improving it. So this castle has been extremely important in the early days of the monarchy and definitely holds a significance when it comes to not only the War of the Roses, but also the what they called the Herring of the North. So during the Pilgrimage of Grace, which we talked about in a previous video, Henry VIII came down really hard on the north, and that was called the Herring of the North, and Pontefract Castle was actually caught up in that. So it has a pretty bloody history, not only in regards to many earls, dukes, kings losing their lives here, but also religious significance. So since Pontefract Castle is renowned as one of the bloodiest castles in England, with one of the bloodiest histories, and the entire thing was constructed on an old Anglo-Saxon burial ground, which gives it a fantastic starting point. There's a lot of ghosts here, a lot of spirits, a lot of activity. A ghostly figure is said to walk around the ruins of the castle holding a large axe, frightening all who see him. There are also reports of phantom monks in the area, and tourists visiting the castle from all parts of the world have reported the same sighting. A black monk walking the remains of the kitchen toward the steps up to the ruins of the Queen's Tower. Strangely, the monk is always walking from west to east, never in the opposite direction. These sightings usually take place around 5 p.m., lockup time in the winter, and people who see the monk are usually shaking and upset. I mean, personally, if I saw a black shadowy figure walking when there shouldn't be anybody, I'd be a little bit upset too. But it is really funny that it's every time, the same time, west to east. So that would really, kind of put a pin in it that it would be a residual type haunt. Because of so many deaths that have occurred within the castle or outside the castle walls, over the years the town earned the nickname Bloody Pomfret. Welcome to Bloody Pomfret. That sounds amazing for a town slogan. On one occasion, the site's custodian or caretaker, Steve Coulson, returned to his office after taking a school party underground. He heard a loud knocking. Concerned he had left someone behind, he returned to where he had been and unlocked the door, and there was nobody there. He later learned that a former custodian also heard the same knocking. And a few months ago, his colleague was convinced that he saw a shadow going down the stairs. These are to the tunnels that are in Pontefract Castle. There are also names inscribed hundreds of years earlier by prisoners held here during the Civil War. The castle may have another ghostly inhabitant because of this. A girl, probably between the ages of 9 and 13, with long brown hair and ragged clothes, has been seen reflected in the mirror in the visitor's center on more than one occasion. But when the spectator looks behind them or around, there's nobody else there. Victorian engineers working below what is now Pontefract General Infirmary in 1851 discovered a tiny chamber built by monks who wanted to live as hermits, and it could only be reached by a spiral staircase, and it even has a skeleton in the ceiling. Richard II, King Richard II, was murdered in the castle in 1400. Little is known about the precise nature of his demise, but there are at least 3 theories which attempt to explain his death. He was starved to death by the keepers, he starved himself to death, or he was murdered by St. Piers Exton on February 14th, 1399, or 1400. When the castle suffered through the English Civil War started by Oliver Cromwell, he actually said that Pontefract was one of the strongest inland garrisons in the kingdom. They continuously bombarded this castle into ruin. So because Richard II was murdered or martyred here, whichever you want to believe, starved himself or was starved, although the consensus is he was starved. He was locked away and starved to death when his cousin Henry Bolingbroke took over the throne. And his ghost has been seen at the castle, which makes sense. It's a pretty traumatic death, being starved to death. So many of you may have seen Windsor Castle on grand display during the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. But it also has some pretty interesting history to it. It's not all glitz and glam. Windsor Castle is a royal residence in the English countryside of Berkshire, very much known for its long association with the English royal family and for its architecture, as well as being one of the most beloved places to stay by the Queen. The original castle was built in the 11th century after the Norman invasion of England. Surprise! More French invaders or Norman invaders. That darn William the Conqueror. Since the time of Henry I, it's been used by the reigning monarch and is the longest occupied palace in Europe, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. Inside the castle walls is the 15th century St. George's Chapel, where many royal weddings have taken place. And it was considered by the historian John Martin Robeson to be one of the supreme achievements of English perpendicular Gothic design. And it is a really, really beautiful church. Originally, Windsor was designed to protect Norman dominance around the outskirts of London and oversee a strategically important part of the River Thames. Windsor Castle was built as a motte and bailey with 3 wards surrounding a central mound. And gradually, as always, they were replaced with stone fortifications. Henry III built a luxurious royal palace within the castle during the middle of the century, and Edward III would go even further, rebuilding the palace to make an even grander set of buildings in what would become the most expansive secular building project of the entire Middle Ages in England. Edward's core design lasted through the Tudor period, during which Henry VIII and Elizabeth I made increasing use of the castle as a royal court and center for diplomatic engagements. Windsor Castle did survive the tumultuous period of the English Civil War, when it was used as military headquarters by parliamentary forces and a prison for King Charles I. At the restoration of the monarchy after the Civil War in 1660, Charles II rebuilt much of Windsor with the help of the architect Hugh May. It did fall into a bit of decay and neglect during the 18th century, but George III and George IV renovated and rebuilt Charles II's palace at an amazing expense, and producing the current design of the state apartments that you see today. Queen Victoria made a few minor changes to the castle, which became the center for royal entertainment for much of her reign. And Windsor Castle was famously used as a refuge for the royal family during the Luftwaffe bombing campaigns of the Second World War, and survived a fire in 1992 that actually ruined one of the original halls in the castle and was rebuilt as best as possible in the old design. It was actually during Queen Elizabeth's Annus Horribilis, the horrible year, which I believe Princess Diana and Prince Charles were getting divorced. Other people were getting divorced in her family. It was just not a good year, and a fire at Windsor, which is her favorite place of residence other than Balmoral. So this excerpt comes from a book by Richard Jones titled Haunted Castles, and it tells one of the ghost stories of somebody seeing Queen Elizabeth I's ghost and not realizing it. And he tells it like this. In February 1897, Lieutenant Carr Glenn of the Grenadier Guards was sitting in the outer room of the Queen's library when a lady dressed in black walked past him and turned a corner. Intrigued by the woman's resemblance to the portraits he had seen of Elizabeth I, Glenn followed but could find no trace of her. Furthermore, there was no doorway through which she could have left the library. He asked an attendant who the woman was, but he was told that the only person who entered the library that afternoon was himself. The attendant then raised the possibility that the lieutenant had been honored with a special sighting of Queen Elizabeth I. And Queen Elizabeth I is not the only ghost that is seen in the castle. Both Henry VIII and Charles I have been seen here. Just before Christmas 1648, Charles Stuart was taken as a prisoner to Windsor Castle, following the decision that he should be prosecuted for his life as a criminal person. Following his trial and beheading in London on January 30th, 1649, his body was returned to Windsor to be buried in the same vault as Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. As the black-draped coffin was being carried towards St. George's Chapel, the sky, which until then had been serene and clear, clouded over and a sudden blizzard swept across the grounds. The black pall over the coffin was all white by the time the funeral cortege reached the end of the chapel, and many took this as a divine sign, proclaiming the king's innocence. Another ghost who people see is George III. He spent a lot of his time at Windsor, and he was very, very sick, so he would spend a lot of time here in his incontinent state, where he would go in and out of consciousness. They called him the Mad King, but he wasn't mad at all. He just had a medical condition. So following his death, while his body still lay in state, the guards were passing the king's window when the commanding officer saw the unmistakable figure of the king standing in his customary place. Instinctively, he gave the order, "Eyes right." And as they swung round, each soldier saw the figure and watched as he returned their salute. King Henry VIII is said to walk the corridors of the castle, dragging his ulcerated leg, groaning in agony. Queen Anne Boleyn, who was beheaded by Henry VIII, has been seen standing at the window in the Dean's Cloister. The prison room in the Northern Tower is haunted, possibly by a former royalist prisoner from Civil War times, and children playing there have seen him and adults have felt him brushed past. Herne the Hunter became the favorite huntsman of King Richard II, and when he saved the monarch from being mauled to death by a cornered stag. Being wounded in the process, he was later healed through witchcraft and the wearing of the stag's antlers. Unfortunately, though, his subsequent friendship with the king and skill in the field bred jealousy by his colleagues, and he was framed for theft. Shame led him to hang himself on Herne's Oak in the Home Park and with a wild hunt. His spirit has since been seen many times careening across the great park searching for lost souls. The Long Walk is haunted supposedly by the ghost of a young Grenadier Guard who shot himself while on duty there in the 1920s. He was seen by at least 2 of his colleagues immediately after his death. So there are lots of haunts that you can go check out for yourself at Windsor Castle. It's not just a pretty face. That's all I have for you today, guys. It's a little bit shorter than the last one I did, but Chillingham was a monster, and the one that I am planning on doing next is another monster. One that I'm very excited to share because I actually have a family member firsthand account that I can share from there, which is super exciting. I hope you enjoyed learning about Pontefract Castle and Windsor Castle. Forgive me if I didn't say Pontefract or Pontefract the correct way all of the time, but I hope you enjoy either way. Like this video if you liked it, leave a comment down below. Give me ideas for other castles or places in England, in the UK, in Ireland, in Europe, or even here in America that I can cover in other series coming up. As always, guys, be well, stay inside, stay safe, and stay sane. One love.